Hello and welcome back to our perfect guided playthrough series where we break down everything you need to know about the game whilst playing through it all ourselves. In our last episode we covered expanded power, which meant we unlocked the power storage, as well as power towers, which we've used to connect our basic starter factory with our new oil facility. From here we set up a basic plastic and rubber line, as well as producing enough fuel to set up 1 gigawatts worth of power from fuel generators, which means we have plenty of power overhead for today's episode, where we're going to be covering monorail technology. Now, as there is a lot to cover with trains, we are going to focus this episode solely on that. I also highly recommend checking out my guide on using trains, which covers everything, but hopefully this will be enough to get you started and connecting your factories together, and later on we'll look at actually using them within a facility. Let's get started. Now, in this episode we are going to be covering 4 topics. The first one is when to use trains and what we're going to be doing in this episode. The second one is how to set up a basic train line. Thirdly, we will be covering basic blueprints and how you can use them to create a train line and how this will speed up the building of a train line. And then finally, setting up and running a train timetable, which will end up with us receiving all of the resources that we are producing at the oil facility here, so the plastic and the rubber, as well as the steel beams, steel pipes, encased industrial beams and motors that we're producing here, and sending them to this storage facility here, just so that we have all the resources in one spot in case we need them. With that out of the way, let's get started. The first thing that we need to do for this is to unlock the train technology, which is monorail train technology in tier 6, and you can see we need 250 motors, 500 encased industrial beams and 1000 steel pipes and beams, which we think we've got them all here actually. Yeah, fantastic. So we're going to send this off and then we can start talking about trains and setting them up. But before we do that, let's cover why you'd use trains. In Satisfactory, we have 4 options when it comes to logistics within our factory, or between factories. The first is conveyors, which we use for everything, and depending on the belt speed, we dictate the throughput of resources throughout our factory. But if we're sending resources from one spot to another, it can be really tedious building lots of conveyor lines, especially as you're expanding. As such, you want to make use of the other logistics that are available to us. We have vehicles. These are your trucks and tractors. Unfortunately, they can be a little bit buggy, so generally speaking, we tend to avoid them, at least I do. The second option are trains. Trains are great at transporting resources across a long distance. They are the best way to send resources by bulk quickly, and unlike vehicles that use fuel to run, trains use power, which means providing you have power in your facility, you can send trains wherever you want. And we're only limited to the amount of trains on a track based on the amount of blocks we have between signals, which we'll talk about at a later date, as it's a bit too much to cover in one video. The fourth option we have available are drones. Drones are great at transporting resources quickly across large distances. The problem is they don't have a large capacity for resources. As such, you can only send a few stacks of items at a time. It's also very difficult to expand on drones because you can only have 2 drones between 2 drone ports. So you'll have to add more drone ports in order to run more drones. Whereas trains, you can just add another train line. The other great thing about trains is that as your factory grows, you're going to be crossing larger spaces between your factories. As such, you need a way to get there from A to B really quickly. You could use hypertubes. I haven't unlocked them yet in this guided playthrough, and we'll probably not use them until update 1.1 because they are bringing some changes to the hypertubes, and I don't see the point in going over the lesson twice. Now, with that breakdown out of the way, I want to briefly touch on the plan for today in our save. So we have our facility here. You can actually see the whole facility, which is kind of cool, but we only have really 4, you could maybe say 5 facilities running. We have the starter facility where the storage is, and also the modular frame factory that's pretty much connected. Well, it is connected, but it's arguably a separate facility. We also have the coal power plant down in the bottom left here, or the top left of the map. The steel facility that we produced a couple of episodes ago, and the oil facility as well. All of this is contained within a single biome. Although we could say that the oil facility is actually in the Golden Coast, so it is in a second biome, but it's all very close together. If you're going to be using trains, I would argue that for any facility that is roughly the distance between the advanced steel factory and our starter facility or our storage facility, I would use a train to go from those 2 spots. And I would also do the same from the starter facility down to the Golden Coast facility as well with the plastic. Now, what you might want to do is develop a train network that can go across the whole world. After all, the map is pretty big, but we're not going to need to worry about that for the time being. So let's get started with the trains and how they run. I've just set up a very quick little platform here for us, so that we can trial this. And we're going to grab our train station, our rail, and also an electric locomotive. The first thing that you want to do is place down a train station. Now, the trains will run along any rails that you place, providing they are powered. So if we place oh look, it's Hefta. We place our electric locomotive here, and we try and jump into it, you can see we can't do anything because there's no power, which means we're going to need to connect this station with our power. From here, we will be able to jump back into it, and we can either set up a train timeline, a schedule for it to follow, or we can drive ourselves using the W and S keys, and you can use A and D to split between junctions. The idea here is that you will have one train station and another one connected by a single rail, and then from here, if we press Q, we can open up the locomotive timetable, and we can edit the timetable, and any stations that are on this rail network will be shown here. So we can do Sydney, Hevda, and if we save changes and turn on the self-driving, the train will try to pass through to the train stations in order. However, in this circumstance, the train will arrive at Sydney, but will not be able to move to Hevda because the train can only travel in the direction of the locomotive. As you can see, station unreachable. So to get this to work, we would need to place another rail connecting Sydney to Hevda. And now you can see the train is going to automatically pass through to Hevda. And now that it's done that, it will continue the timetable. It's going to swap over to Sydney and then have that again. If we have multiple trains on the line and we don't use block signals, like in this circumstance, you may find that if you're not careful, they're going to collide with one another. This isn't efficient for our factories. So for today, while we don't have signals available, we are going to just use a single train circuit. But if this happens, you just need to go over to the trains and press E, to re-rail them. And then you'd need to set the timetable again. So, turn back on the self-driving. This here is a very basic system. You can have multiple stations in a given circuit, not just 2. And another thing to bear in mind, if I stop this briefly, is if we remove these, we can also run the train line slightly differently. So if you want, rather than having a circuit, you can run a train line between 2 stations in different directions by having 2 locomotives in different directions. So from here, we'd set up the train timetable again. So it would be Amsterdam and Hevder this time. And then we can turn on self-driving. And you can see this is just going to go back and forth. And if you had a freight on it, you could drop resources off from one location and pick it up from another. That's all we really need to know about setting a train line for now. We will talk about more as we get further into this video. But if you are worried about using trains, do check out my specific basic guide to using trains. It covers everything that you could possibly need to know about them in the early game. Oh, and one other thing, you don't have to build on a foundation. You can absolutely, should you wish, place train lines on the world. But the problem is, due to all the different changes in terrain, you may have weird clipping. So to avoid that, I always build on top of foundations, and I highly recommend you do the same, but it's your choice entirely. Anyway, I'm going to remove all of this for now, and then we'll get started with the build. Also, just very briefly jumping into my Let's Play save, you can check out the series as well at the same time. It's slightly further along. You can see that we're using double rails. The reason for this is that with a large network, you want trains to go back and forth. And so we run the rails in sets of 2, with one line going one direction, another line in the other direction. And do not worry, I know that seeing something like this can be quite overwhelming. We are going to cover how you can slowly develop this in your own save, should you wish to. And the great thing about this particular network is that the majority of this is using blueprints to build it. Blueprints can be fantastic for rail networks as they make it so much quicker to build something like this, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing now. So let's head back to the guided playthrough save. We're going to start off by building a very basic blueprint here. So I'm going to grab the foundations here, and we're going to do a straight blueprint. This is going to be for 2 train lines or 2 railway lines. We're going to decorate it slightly. The reason that I want to decorate this is because if you put the effort into creating a pretty blueprint that you're going to be using often, it kind of builds a theme around the save. And so for me, I always find it really useful to just put a little bit of effort into doing a blueprint so that it's going to look nice around your build. I'm going to grab these small concrete pillars. I'm going to place it on the edge there. I can remove that. And then from here, I'm going to, I hope this works. I'm trying it for the first time live, so we'll have to fix it if it doesn't look great. But my hope is that we can run the rails in this section. We're not going to add the rails to the blueprint because you can't connect the rails between blueprints. I just want to see how it would look. Okay, it's very tight, but I don't think this will clip. Or if it does, it's very minimal. Yeah, it's like not noticeable. I like that. Okay, so I'm going to play around with that for this rail network. I'm also going to change the material to concrete just because it's much easier to produce a lot of concrete than it is to produce concrete and iron and then have to keep going back and forth to collect the resources. And the idea is not to do something uber complicated. I mean, you can if you want, but something that's just going to look quite nice. Let's change the color of this to We don't have any metal. You know what? I'm going to unlock really quickly over in the awesome shop, because I'm sure we have some coupons, some stuff to play around with. Ooh, signs. I'm going to unlock signs because I think we can add some really pretty looking stuff to this blueprint, but you don't need to follow if you don't want to. I'm also going to unlock windows because we're going to, the plan is decorate the facility a little bit more in the next episode, and then I will make this save available to you once I'm happy with the early build. So I'm going to grab those, and with that in mind, we can play around with the design here. So I'm going to just press G, and you can see up in the sky it says customize a filter modern railing, which means that if I'm holding down the mouse button, it's only going to paint other modern railings that it comes in contact with. We're not going to add a lot of these, but I am going to add just occasionally, maybe in the very center. I'm going to place down this label sign. And a little tip, you can use these for signs or decoration. I use them a lot for decoration. And what we do is, if we get rid of the background, we now have, if we close this, a plain sign. We can then change the background color to whatever you want. Say you wanted green here. I probably won't go with green, but we'll do it for now. And then we can change the emission strength. So if we turn it to off and glossy, you get this kind of look. However, if we turn emission strength up, creates a kind of light. And I wouldn't recommend this if you're using a older PC, as it might be a lot of effort for it to run if you're using lots of signs. But for others, you can do this and use it within your build to create some great looking facilities. For this, let's actually go with like a darker blue. How would that look? I don't think it's needed, to be honest. Perhaps we could do it in the center. We could actually run it all the way across. And I want you just to play around with your own design. You don't have to follow what I do exactly. Maybe you like this, maybe you don't. This is your opportunity to really find what works for you. In fact, though I like this, it's probably best to keep the inner section untouched, because we are going to do a curved blueprint. So instead, let's add something to the outside. Maybe go with a basic wall. Do the same on the other side. And I'm going to delete these two because they're 1 meter foundations. The blueprint will try to snap to the bottom. So we're going to replace that with a 2 meter foundation, and providing all the other blueprints are 2 meters, they should snap together. Now I'm going to play around with this a little bit more, maybe add a little sign, and I'll show you once it's done. Another quick note, if you're wanting to get something lower, on the signs you can nudge them using the arrow keys. They've kind of flipped the vertices. Normally if it's down here, you use the arrow keys and you can go back and forwards, left and right. But they've had it so that the vertices allows for vertical plane, and if you hold down control you can do it in half increments. However, in this circumstance we can't get it just below. Instead, if you want to get it there, you can snap a sign above and then snap another one below that. Oh, you know what, I like the green there, except I'm going to place this here. The reason that I'm doing this is if we place it on each of the mid sections here, when the blueprint connects to the other blueprint here, you're not going to be able to add a sign. So instead, if we place the sign in the middle of a foundation, we won't have that issue. So we've done the first blueprint. However, I do want to just very quickly talk about whether your blueprint fits in with your build. You don't have to do this, you can build however you want, but for me, if I run that green lit sign across the whole of my world blueprint, it can make other sections of the world seem a bit out of place. For example, we use a lot of the orange border here, or even the white border. And so if we want them to kind of blend together, we probably want to go with orange or white rather than that green. So I'm going to swap the colors and then we're going to work on the corner pieces. Perfect. So we're going to save this as our first straight two-way blueprint for trains. There we are. And we are going to set a directory for this. So we will add the blueprint here, and then we go to edit. We can add a category. We're going to call this railway, and add icon if you want, apply that, and pull this over to here. Oh, we need to add a subcategory, don't we? Two-way rail lines. So with that now done, we can move this over to here and apply the changes. And this is our first blueprint for here. We're going to do the same now for a left turn and a right turn. So for this, I'm going to delete, in fact, we can just delete all of this. I just need to remember how I've done it. So we can clear the blueprint designer. Then we're going to grab our 2 meter foundation, and we're going to make sure that it's the same material. So from here, I've just pressed E and held it down to bring up this radial dial. And if you press right click or left click, you can dictate which material it is. We're just going to place 2 of these in a line, and this corner is going to go to the right. And so from here, we're going to hold control with the foundation just over the opposite corner to which way we want to turn. So we want to turn to the right. We're going to hold control and place the center of this foundation over the corner in the left. From here, with it held, you're going to turn it 1 increment using the mouse wheel, still holding control, and you want to turn it in the direction that you want the turn to go. So we've turned it to the right, and we're going to now press H and then use the arrow keys to nudge it into the right position, which is 4 forwards and then 4 to the right. And then from here, all we're going to do is grab the foundation, snap it to the bottom, and then pull it across. And if we delete this now, you should see that this is a perfect connection. And this is a 5-degree turn. You can use tighter turns, but generally speaking, when you're using trains, gentler slopes look better. So once again, we're holding control. I've pressed H to lock it into position, but we're going to hold control, turn it 1 to the right or clockwise, nudge it 4 forwards, nudge it 4 to the side, and that looks like it's not quite there. We go. And then we're going to snap the foundation underneath and bring it across. And then once more, turn it, nudge it 4 forwards, nudge it 4 to the side, and then zoop that so that we have a right turn. Now we're going to repeat what we just did for the previous blueprint. So for me, I need to remove one of these. I'm going to place a 1 meter. The reason that I'm doing that, by the way, if I grab the small concrete pillar, you'll notice that this is snapping just in these 3 spots, and we need it lower. So for example, if it was here, we actually need it on a slightly lower plane. So I'm using a 1 meter foundation to find the right spot. And the moment of truth is whether these look good on a turn. Hopefully it does. And grab a single wall. I'm going to do the same here. Delete these and repeat the process, making sure that we've got 2 meter foundations. if you're struggling to get the right position with these, if you have it so that the edge here is along the centerpiece, you can then go the opposite side, which is this side, and hold control to get the snapping position, then run it through. And that is about as good as we're going to get on a corner, and that's in the right position as well. Fantastic. Right, I'll see you once this is done. Now here is a little secret. We've just done the two-way right curve. I'm just going to place this here, and now we're going to place it down, and I'm going to show you what happens when we place these together. For the purpose of this demonstration, I am flying, but we're going to place the first one on the ground, and then if we grab the second one, which we can do so by clicking E, you'll notice that we can snap these together. So if you press R to go to blueprint mode and you draw these close together, because they have the same foundations, we can just snap them together, which is fantastic, except you cannot do a left curve. Even if we were to go to default mode, you see how we can only do a right curve. So we need to do a separate left and right curve blueprint. But also, if we then snap this in blueprint mode to the end of the curve, it won't snap together. Instead, you have to go into default mode and then snap it to the edge like that. And so you can easily create blueprints for rails that snap together like this. However, this section between these two curves is now straight, which is fine for the one-off. But if you want to have it so that it's a continuous curve, what we can do, if we head back over there briefly, is if we just delete the first foundation, the one that's against the straight edge of the blueprint designer, we can now save this, and let's call it right curve continued, place it here, and we can now apply that. If we head back over to our testbed, if we delete the section here that we placed, and now we grab our continued right curve, notice how in default mode that it's not quite against the edge. That's because we need to nudge it. So if you press H to lock or snap the blueprint in place, you can then use the up or down keys to nudge it into the right position. And from here, it's a continued curve. So from this point, we can now continue placing these to create a continuous curve, creating a really nice look for our tracks. Anyway, I'm going to delete these and do the left-hand turn. And then we're going to get to setting up the railway. And here we are, we have 5 blueprints available. So the next thing that I'm going to do is remove the blueprint designer that we have. Oh, make sure I save that. Okay, so now that's saved, I'm going to remove the blueprint designer and we're going to make space for a station here. And then we're going to get started with the blueprint system and creating our rail line. This does also mean that the concrete or limestone section here is going to have to be brought down underneath these. As you play the game, you are going to have times where you have to edit and redo things. Don't be afraid of doing that. It's perfectly fine, and often when you tear something down and rebuild it, it tends to be much better than the original. So if you have a situation like this where you have to rework something, don't be afraid of it. If it's a big project, maybe just build somewhere else, but don't be afraid to do small tweaks like this. With the blueprint designer out the way, we've made some space, and this is actually where we're going to put the storage facility. So we're going to wrap it around here, I think now. So instead, the train stations are going to have to go here. And I say train stations plural because we're going to want to drop off lots of different resources here. And if we mix the trains, you can have 2 different trains going into one station, but then you have to sort the resources after, which can be time consuming. So instead, we're going to use this straight section here to act as the main line. We're going to place this actually above the foundations that we've already placed. So this will continue straight all the way across. And I'm also going to grab the second cam so that you can see us set this up. But for now, we'll have it so that the stations can go here. So I'm going to lay that all out and you can enjoy it from the second cab. So what I'm doing in this segment here is I'm opening this up for the train stations. So the idea is that the trains will come down the main track and then turn into the train stations. The next thing that we need to do is to place our first railway lines. And I always start from the middle of a foundation and run it to the middle. I just find this works particularly well on the corners. So in this circumstance, we're going to bring this around. We want it to align with the middle point. We can continue this all the way around and it should be quite a smooth curve. At this point, we do have the choice of whether we want the trains to be left-hand drive, which would mean that the trains would drive in this direction straight into the station, or right hand, which would be from this section. Honestly, though I'm British, I think Satisfactory tries to get us to drive right-handed because the signals will be placed to the right of the line that you're traveling along. So when we get to signaling, which dictate the direction of travel, if you want to go forwards, you have to pass the signal on the right. If you do this on the left-hand drive, the signals will be here, then on this one, here, and so they kind of clash with one another. So for that reason, I recommend going with right-hand drive, and this would turn into this section. And do a straight line, hopefully from here, and we'll be able to connect these up, or not. So with that, we might have to bring the straight line further across. When you're doing curves, sorry, I should mention this, rather than go straight into a curve, more often than not, it is beneficial to place bracer tracks, which are the two straight tracks going in and out of the curve. It just ends up looking cleaner, and sometimes if you do the curve freehand, it can be that it ends up staying wonky even though you're trying to straighten it out afterwards. Because it's trying to correct. And so if this was slightly off rather than straight, it would try and counter the curve when you're doing the straight piece next. And it ends up just being very wobbly, which we don't need or want. So with this being our first line going in, we're going to have a train station, and you're going to want this not here, but given the freight stations are the same size as a train station, we're actually going to want this in front, a little bit further along actually. So I'm going to extend this a touch more. We've got 4 resources that we want to bring in from the steel factory. That is the steel beams, the steel pipes, the encased industrial beams, and the motors. So we're going to want to have 4 freight stations on this train line. And so from here, we're going to place our first freight station, depending on which side you want it to be, can either be left or right. I'm having it facing the closest to the storage. I'm going to remove this now and place that there. And we're also going to make sure that this is connected. I'm going to replace it. So we need 4 resources, though we can mix and match by bringing them into the same freight station. You run the risk of mixing stuff on your belt, which we do not want. So as such, we've got 4 separate freight stations, which are going to each have their own dedicated resource. And on these, you want to make sure that it's selected unload if it's unloading. Another thing to do when you're setting up your stations is just to make sure that the station is what you want it to be. We don't need it to be hefter because it can be quite confusing knowing what's going where. So instead, I name mine based on what they're receiving. So for example, here it's going to be steel to storage, or we could put storage, steel. And then if we close that, hopefully, yeah, it's saved. Now we know what's coming in and we can prep the next one. The next thing that we want to do is have another train line next to this, which means we're going to have to split our tracks. Now this is really easy to do. All you need to do is find a joint on the train line and you can split that as many times as you want. And doing so will create this little indicator here. And if you want, you can toggle it. If a train is set to a timetable, it will path its way directly to the train stations. So it doesn't matter what this is set to, the train will change it. Also, if you're on the train, you can use the left and right keys to dictate the direction. And if we were to say this was a three-way line, you can see it changes to allow 3 different joints. With that out the way, let's set up the second station and then we'll do the rest of the line. So for this, I think we're going to try and keep it quite tight, given that we haven't got that much space here. As such, I'm actually going to place the next train station next door to it. If you press H, sometimes, if it's unsupported, it will turn green and allow you to place it. You can use that to your advantage later on, but we won't be doing that for today's video. We are going to place this so that there is one foundation in between. Then we're going to place our 2 resource freight stations. Underneath here, we're going to have to bring the resources down. So we need to make sure we have space, which we do. And then for this section, you can keep it like this, or if you want, you can add an empty platform. It's really what you prefer. We're going to ensure that it's the same length as this train station. And then we will be able to place that there and bring this round. Keep everything as clean as possible. I'm going to try and keep it in the same position as the one next to it. We're going to bring this round so that the straight section is there. So that should be straight. Lovely. Hopefully that looks quite nice from above. And now I'm going to run the rest of the line. Of course, I didn't think this through. The train's going this direction. We're going to have to merge back onto here, which is perfectly viable. So we'll do that next. So with the trains, they're going to merge in the same direction. I'm going to bring it round, and this is going to go straight, and then hopefully there'll be enough room for this one to merge here. So we're going to need to run another line all the way along. Another thing to bear in mind is that if you're trying to do a sharp turn, trains can turn only slightly tighter than 3 foundations. So this is about 2.5. So for this, we've got 3 foundations. So if we go 3 along, 3 down, and we bring this to here, we should be able to do a nice right angle turn. And then with a little bit of luck, we can merge this there. And so the trains are going to merge onto here. And I've just realized I am prepping this for if we have 2 trains on a track, which means we're going to have problems until we unlock the signal. So for this video, we are only going to run a single train, but it will go to these 2 separate train stations. So again, we're going to do a right-hand turn. So we want this to end just there. And then we have the bracer track, which because it's right-hand drive, I want to make sure it's going onto the right-hand lane. If you place this and it's going off in a different direction, if you hold down Control, it will keep it straight. As a heads up, that's useful for things like curves, if you're trying not to curve, or also if you're going up and down slopes. Keep them straight. At this point, we have the station sorted for storage. I'm now going to run the train line all the way down to the oil. And on the way back, we will also run another line over to there and bring it back so that it connects over in this section here. So this is going to take us a few minutes. So we'll probably time lapse it and you can see from above how it looks. When it comes to setting up my network in my main save, I use two types of rail network pieces. I have the double set and I also have a single set, which you may want to do now. It will make your life so much easier. I haven't set one up, so we're just going to make do at the moment. But one thing to bear in mind is that trains can only go a max incline of 3 meters downwards or upwards. Unfortunately, we only have 2 meters or 4 meters, so the only way that you can do a 3 meter line is if you use beams. And I cover this in the rail guide. I do highly recommend checking that out in addition to this one. But at this point, my plan is to bring the train line down to here, and then we're going to, if I can, which will be very tight, but I'm going to try and manually bring this round to the left. It might be a little bit too tight, but if we can do it, we can then loop this section back round to the main line and connect it with the other side of the rail. I think it's going to be too tight. And also collect the resources. In this circumstance, what do we do? I think our best bet is actually just to place this above and to see if we can make it work just a tier higher. Okay, yeah, I think it's touch flipping through, but to a point where it's okay for us to build along here. So what I'm going to do, once these get out, I will finish this off and loop it round, and then you can see how we've done it. Okay, I've decided it's taken far too long. I'm going to do just the curve for a single line on either direction, and hopefully that'll just speed things up for me. I should also mention while I'm doing this blueprint that I do want you to take the time to build your own blueprints, but if you are struggling, I do have all of my blueprints over on Patreon. So if you want to support the content, you can find all of them there. It'll just help you do all these builds without having to put in all this effort setting up these blueprints initially. But this is just about done, so I am going to get back to working on the train line. Now in this circumstance, we're at odds ends. So we have a cliff coming in halfway through the foundation, which means that the train line is going to clip. So for this, we're going to tighten the curve ever so slightly. Well, we're going to double its tightness by grabbing one of these catwalk intersections. Now I don't tend to use this for train curves anymore because it's slightly tighter. But in this circumstance, it's going to be much better. So all I'm doing is I'm holding control as I place this against another catwalk. So hold control, and then from here I'm going to pivot using the mouse wheel. And then in zoop mode, we're dragging 2 across. And this allows us to create a snapping point for our foundations. It's a quicker curve creating method, but because it's 10 degrees rather than 5 degrees, it's much sharper and looks more straight edged, as you can see there. But I thought I should show you that. And now we're going to do the straight line. In fact, it's probably going to be better to do the straight line in this direction, because then we can cut half of the blueprint away and bring the train line up inside the middle of it. And this gives us plenty of space for our plastic and rubber train station as well. So I'm going to continue with this, and I'll see you in a few minutes. I was obviously rather enthusiastic with getting the turn to be a little bit tighter, but you can see what we've done here. It's a bit tighter there. But the problem now is bringing this back up. And if we drop down here, you can see I've brought it almost in line. And then from here, we're ramping up into this foundation here. Because we're on a slight intersecting path, it's not too bad for us. We can just blend it in without any issues. In future videos, I am sure we're going to have to talk about how to blend grids together and how to perfectly bring them together. And I shall do that. But for now, I highly recommend trying to blend them cleanly together just by gently ramping them into one another. And then, for example, here, just run that there. And if you want, you can run a ramp alongside that, kind of as like a wall. But this isn't really the topic of this video, so I'm going to leave that for a future one. If you want us to cover it in the next video, let me know, and I'll make sure to add that to the list. But this is going to be a long enough video as it is. Right, so now that we've blended this back onto the grid, it's time to add the train station and rail to it. So let's start off with adding the rail from the facility all the way back to base. And once I've done all of this railway line, I'll show you the train station here. Okay, so here we are. We have the train looping round. So I'm going to add our station, and we want that probably all the way up here, thinking about it. So let's just bring it ever so slightly back. And we're going to need space for two, actually I'm going to bring it there. We're going to need space for 2 freight stations. So we're going to press H to lock that in. And we're having the inputs on the left-hand side, and we'll do the same with the second one. Invalid placement. Why is that? I think that's because of this node. We need to get rid of any of these if we want to build nearby. They have a hitbox which stops us being able to, there you go, place these. Finally, we will add, we don't really need an empty platform, but you can have one if you want. Why not? And then I'm going to build the foundations out a little bit. And then the next thing would be to bring the resources to the station. You know what? I was saying that we won't merge the grids in this video, but I'll show you. We can go more in depth with this in the next one if you want. I will show you how to do it now because we're gonna need to. Let's say we have our resources on this grid here. This is the, I think this is the world grid. Yeah. But we need to merge with another grid that is at the same vertical height, but just in a different angle. How can we do this? Well, let me show you. we're going to need to use the same foundation type. So this is a 2 meter, this needs to be a 2 meter. We're then going to grab a painted beam, and you want to place this painted beam halfway down on the very corner of the foundation. You're then going to press R so that you go in, or hold down R so that you go to freeform mode, and then you're going to want to bring that, I'm going to snap it in position, in the exact position on the corner you want the grids to merge. So you should have something that looks like this. From here, we're going to add a foundation. In fact, let's start from the other side. And we need to press H. Doing so allows us to nudge the foundation along, and we're going to nudge it 4 places. It's always 4 places with whatever we do. And from here, we're going to nudge to the left 4 places. What that does is create the perfect blend between this and this. And then we need to do the same on this section to this grid. So we're creating a 3rd grid to bridge between 2 grids. And so now that that's done, we can delete this, and you'll notice that it blends onto one another seamlessly. Depending on which way you go, you may have gaps on the other side, in which case you would have to do the exact same system again. But that is an easy way to blend grids together. But now that's done, I'm going to bring the resources across, and we can start loading at the train station. So we have now brought our resources to the train station, but the train station isn't letting any of the resources in. Why is that? Well, if the rail network is not powered, it's not going to work. It's not going to run. So in order to get this to run, we just need to connect this to some kind of power connection. So we could do it over here if we wanted to. And as you can see, now it is running. However, I don't want to connect it there. So what we're going to do is connect power at the other train station that we placed earlier. We're going to make sure all of this is connected, and then we can get the train line running. So just make sure that these are all set to loading. Yeah. And then we will head back. We've made it back to the facility, and now we're going to place a power nub from this facility across to here. And then from there, that can connect up to there, and we should now have power. But also, because we have connected all of this together, we'll now be able to jump into the train and drive it back to the other location to check that it's connected. And you can see this is a fair bit quicker than running, as we're running at, well, traveling at 121 kilometers per hour, which is the max speed unless you're going downhill with one of these. Look at that wonderful smooth curve. We're going to slow down now. We can see that the plastic and the rubber is feeding into the station. Though this isn't quite complete, we can now add 2 freight cars to this train. I'm also going to paint this, because why not? And, well, thinking about it, it's going to be a 4-line train for now. Let's add this. And then we're going to have this run from Balti-Jam, which we're going to change shortly, and run it to steel, then to... Oh no, that's not right. To storage plastic, and then afterwards we're going to go to the other station and then to storage steel. So we're going to save that for now. Doesn't matter if we turn it on, it's not going to, well, it's going to pick up the resources, but it's not going to be able to go to the next station. So I'm going to change this to plastic pickup, and we can see The plastic and rubber is being loaded into the station. Now on the other side, while this loading is happening, these are not filling up. This does mean that train stations do have a slight inefficiency, but we can work around this, which we'll probably cover in the next episode. So now you'll notice it's unreachable. We cannot go to the next station, and that is if we turn off self-driving. The turnings for the train stations are on the other side of the track. As such, we can't turn into it, drop off the resources and continue on. But that is fine, because from about here, I think if we follow the river, we'll be able to bring the resources around the biome and reconnect over there. So I'm going to do that now. In this circumstance, we want to run the train, or have the option to run the train to the right along here. And so we have two options available to us. We can either do a T-junction and split off so that it goes in this direction, and we have the return line coming in this direction as well. Or we can go for a roundabout, and the roundabout is probably going to be the best option here. I'm doing this because I think it's probably really useful to show you guys. So hopefully you'll be able to see this from the above character recording. But what I'm going to do is find the middle section, which would be here. Typical. Gonna need a bit more space than that. So maybe we do it from here, and I'm going to just open up this section. We can remove the train line, we can remove a couple of these, and then at this point, I'm going to place a couple more foundations. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if this will work. So we're going to place a straight line up to the middle section, and then from here, I'm just going to run this around in an O shape. I'm hoping we don't quite have enough room. It's too sharp. So if we try this, but we'll push it back a little bit more. So we're going to go to this edge here. Then we'll run this around to the opposite edge. Still not quite, so we need a little bit more space than this. We need to add a straight section first, otherwise you can't do the curve, which is why I've done that there. And we're going to try it again in this position here. Hopefully this will work. It should be. So that is the middle. And then from here, we can bring this all the way around to here. And we can remove this section. And here we have a roundabout track. Unfortunately, it's not quite ready for us to use. So I'm going to... got no power. Fantastic. Let's just connect this briefly. And we're just going to bring this back. I'm going to clean this up a little bit more. Reconnect that, and we'll do the same on the other side. Oh, we don't have... Oh no. So the tip that I was going to show you is dependent on us having access to signals. But we don't have signals unlocked yet, so I'm going to have to do this in quarter turns and just hope that this works. It's much easier if you have access to signals, because you can place where the connections are, whereas for this we're just having to work with what we have access to. But all I'm going to do, cut this back a little bit more, is connect that up to that point. We're going to connect this one up to this point. It should work fine, but I'm going to connect this point up into this section. So for here we have the middle point. So we're going to press R in our delete mode and go to blueprints, and then we're going to middle click so that we have the ability to copy and paste our blueprints. And then from here we're just going to place 2, and we're going to delete the barriers here. We'll do the same on the other side. I'm going to place the train line. We're going to do this on both sides. Bring it up to here, and then bring this around to there. This is a It's an odd roundabout in that if this train wants to go up into this section here, it's going to have to go all the way around and then split off at this section. It can't join here. If we had signals unlocked, we could do that, but unfortunately for now this is just going to have to make do, and we can change it later on. So in this section here, we cannot join with here because we have a joint here, and you can't merge onto a splitting joint, or at least it says that you can't. But if you bring it across to this position and then press H, you'll see that it allows it. So just a little trick there. Let's push these back a touch more. Okay, so now we have a roundabout, and it will work, but it's a little bit finicky. So with this one, because we can't split off immediately, what's going to happen is that the train has to go around all the way to this point, and then from here it can go off. So now that we know that this works, I'm going to start building the rail route again, and hopefully we'll be able to time lapse it so that you can see how we do this a little bit quicker, because it's going to take me hopefully not too long, maybe half an hour, fingers crossed. In this section, we have the option to go further around to the steel facility, which is just over here, or we can go straight on and round to the train stations. So what I've decided we're going to do is we're going to do a junction here, and then once we're out of the junction space, which should be about now, we can grab our straight one, and we're going to place that, and we're just going to continue straight through. So this section's going to go back to the train station. This one is going to go over to the other facility. So for this, all we need to do is remove the excess barriers here. Same with the signs. Hey, you know, that is actually a pretty clean junction. I prefer this to the ones that I'm currently using in my save. I might have to do this in my main save. So we're running the lines here, and we're going to have another line to go straight from here. So we'll place this. Going to add the railway going into the junction to the bracing points. This is a corner. We don't want to end it here ideally, if we can avoid that. Just because it can make it a little bit wonky when it comes to the railway pieces joining. And we want it as clean as possible. Next, let's do the straight section going in from this side. And now that we have the 3 braced sections, we can run this one into there and this one straight across. And from here, we're going to run this all the way around. Perfect. Clean junction. I'm going to run that all the way around as well. And we now have a little split. Obviously, if we have access to the signals, we can signal the junction so that there are no collisions. But for now, I'm going to remove these trees. And I'm doing this in single mode because I think it's quite nice to have the trees either side if they're not clipping. And then I'll continue with the build. Now this is where it gets interesting. So we have to merge this back onto there. Now we know, if we go back to here, we can tell how steep the incline is. This had to be raised above the terrain, and we know that it's 6 meters. So if we go back to here, either this has to come up 6 meters or this has to go down 6 meters. And I am tempted, I think, to actually bring it down. So that's 3 of these, because we're going to have to bring a train underneath there, but we now have to merge these up. We're going to try our best to see if we can do it with the pieces that we've got available. We may have to play around with it slightly. So let's try with a right curve. I don't think this is going to work. So we'll bring this, we're going to now jump to the continued curve. And this is clearly, it's about 1 foundation out. So what we could do is either remove this section and try and merge them, which I think might work actually. Or the other option would be to bring it further back to the straight section, add another foundation, and then add the curves and see how it lines up. But we might be, we are pretty close. So with this, I think we're so close to being in line. So I think we're just going to fake it here. Fake it until you make it. And we'll add some kind of support here. We do intend absolutely to support the tracks. I'll probably do that outside of stream because I'm not going to do anything special for it. I'm just going to maybe add some steel supports. And you know what? Unless you're aware it's there, you won't notice it. So I think that is pretty good, especially given we have these. Of course, the next thing that we need to do after connecting that up is to bring in the next piece, which will probably join here and mess everything up. But anyway, now that you've seen how I join pieces up, I'm going to finish this, starting with here. Finally, the network is done. We are now going to focus on sorting out the train station over at the steel facility, and then after that we will look at setting up the timetables and then sending everything to storage. Let's head over there. In this circumstance, the train station is ready to receive items, but unfortunately, if we check out the other side, we have the lower inputs and outputs obscured by the terrain. So for this particular system, given we're not receiving a huge amount of resources, we're going to cover it up. I don't do this all the time, but sometimes I feel that a little bit of artistic clipping can aid us in making better looking factories. So this time we're going to cover the lower section. So lifting it up 4 meters, we're just going to use these sections instead for the inputs rather than the lower section. So the next thing that I'm going to do is just bring all the resources around to this area, and hopefully we'll be able to send them all to the train station without any issues. For this section, you can see that if we try and pull this across to here, it doesn't like doing straight mode, so we'd have to use default mode. But I want to keep everything as clean as possible, so I'm going to bring everything up to the line here, and then we can use straight mode, or we could use default mode. I prefer straight mode to bring the resources where we need them, like so. And I'm also going to cover that section as well, so that it's all in line, and then hopefully the other side you won't see anything. Yeah, perfect. So at this point, I'm going to just clean up all of this. I'll probably do the supports now as well, and I'm going to bring all the resources along from the other end of the facility. So I'll probably bring them all the way down here and drop them off so they run across to the train station. We now have all of the steel and the motors being sent all the way down the side and across to the train station. It's really quite clean, actually. I'm quite happy with how that's turned about. And at this point, we are going to set the timetables so that we have a train that's going to all of the stations. It'll just be a single train for now until we unlock signals, and then we can start adding more trains to this. But before we do that, we do need to at least hook up some awesome syncs over at the receiving train station, because otherwise we're not going to be able to split the resources off whilst we're setting up our storage, and thus everything will be going to the wrong location. So let's quickly do that. I've hooked the awesome syncs to the end of these stations now, and I've also calculated that we're not exceeding 270 items per minute from any of the lines combined. So the plastic and the rubber, all the steel and the motors. So we can now get the facility up and running and see how it goes. So if we wanted to, we could head all the way back over to collect the train there, but I am incredibly lazy. And so I'm going to show you a little trick now with the stations. If you click on the station and you go to timetable, you can select the train, and you can actually name the train as well. So if we call this first train, just so that we know this is the first one that we've had, we can add the timetable. So we have the plastic pickup, storage plastic, then we can do this one, which I need to change the name of, to storage steel, and then it will continue on to plastic afterwards. So let's save that, turn on self-driving, and we're going to let it hopefully start running, and there you go. So we are going to go check it out as it collects the items from the other facility, and we'll see if it runs. And the train has dropped off both plastic and rubber and the steel and motors, which is fantastic. They are full at the moment, and that's because I forgot to turn on the awesome syncs at the other end, but soon that should all run perfectly fine. So whilst we're letting that run, we're going to sort out the storage over there. So we need to firstly have lines taking each of these resources over to the storage, and we also need to set up storage for plastic, rubber, steel beams, steel pipes, encased industrial beams, and motors. So we'll do that now. So once again, we're going to add our awesome sync at the end, which can be in this slot over here. And we're going to add the first two storage containers. These are going to be for plastic and rubber. Actually, depending on whether we have room, because we have a cliffside here, we might not be able to use the space under here, in which case the resources will have to run along the left side of the build, which would mean that we would have the steel section first, followed by the plastic and rubber. So we'll do the first four for steel and motors, and then these two are going to be for the plastic and rubber. And as with the previous setup, we're going to use the smart splitters again, and we're going to run a merging line for them all along here. Actually, if I remember rightly, we didn't do it like that. We did a elevator up, so it would be this way, with the merger. Same this side, but this one needs to go in that direction. And I might 3-belt across. This will then go down and along into the awesome sink. And we're going to repeat this for each of the lines. I've yet to add the dimensional depots above the storage, but you can see the lines of conveyors. What we've done is brought them around to this section here, and then underneath here, we're taking the conveyors down, and they're going to go about 4 meters down so that there's just enough room in this valley here to just duck beneath here. And from here, they're going to head directly to the train stations. The first 4 will be receiving the resources from here, and then the other 2 will be slightly further along. So I'm just going to finish doing that now, and then once that's done, we'll connect everything up and everything should empty quite quickly. I've now connected all of these to the lower section. If we fly above, they're still sending stuff to the sink, but we can just really easily now remove the belts and connect them up. And from now on, whatever's coming through there will start depositing and heading to the facility. We're just going to run these to the other station now. This is for the plastic and the rubber. And the reason that I'm doing it with underfloor conveyors is it just cleans up the whole facility. It looks so much cleaner. And the other problem with multiple stations is you're either having to send resources over the rail lines or crossing lines, which just doesn't look very good. So where possible, I highly recommend having your train logistics on one height and then your conveyor logistics on another. It just makes it so much cleaner to use. Oh, speaking of the train, here it is. And looks like it's going to steal. And whilst we've got a moment, let's just remove these. And if we connect these up, should see all of them are now heading to storage, so we can delete this. And now that we have all of our resources coming through, that is it for this video. I'm just going to add some dimensional depots across the top of there. And after that, I'm just going to clean up some of the facility, but there's no need to show you what we're doing. Anything I'll probably do is, as you can see here, adding some framed pillars beneath it just to make it look a bit supported, and perhaps we'll work on some supports as well. I must admit, on the whole, I'm really happy with how this has turned out. We've done all of the supports now and everything is running. In the next episode, I think we'll be looking at doing computers, or if not, we'll be looking at expanding the power further, because trains can consume quite a bit. And as we start to unlock the manufacturers and producing things like computers and heavy modular frames, we are going to have a much larger demand on our power infrastructure. So it'll be one of those two in the next episode. If we have computers, then I believe we'll be able to unlock the signals, which means we'll be able to run multiple trains in that episode. And if it's the fuel, then we'll probably look at trying to get some alternate recipes to make fuel production more efficient. Let me know which you'd prefer in the comments below. But we are going to leave it there for today. If you did want access to the blueprints that we used in this, again, you can support me through Patreon if you'd like, and you can get access to all of our blueprints on there. But we are going to leave it there. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to all of our amazing supporters on Patreon, most notably our Lunar Eclipse patrons, Firefless, The Calamity, Ben, Anstar, and Seeker Kala, as well as our Blood Moon of the day, which today is Dr. Shotgun. Until next time, as always, ciao for now.